The night was bitter, cold enough to bite through bone. Eliza Rowan's breath escaped in fragile clouds, vanishing into the dark. Her feet, bare against the frozen ground, ached with every step as she stood at the edge of the Red Creek station, her thin dress barely a shield against the biting wind. The train had already disappeared, its whistle a long, fading echo. The people around her laughed, embracing, meeting family and friends with joy. But she remained alone. In her hand, she gripped a sack, tied with frayed rope, her entire life inside. Once a flour bag, now it contained nothing but remnants, a torn shirt, a cracked comb, and a tarnished locket she couldn't bring herself to open. A weight pressed against her chest. She had come all this way for hope, for something better, but it felt like the world had turned its back on her. The station master approached with a careful step, his voice soft but lacking any real comfort. "Someone meeting you?" he asked, his eyes searching for any glimmer of recognition. Eliza swallowed. Her throat was tight, her body cold in every way imaginable. She nodded, fumbling with a crumpled newspaper clipping. She unfolded it slowly, her fingers trembling. The notice had been worn thin from too many hands, too many hopes. "I'm here for the position," she said, her voice a ghost. He glanced at the paper, his face falling as quickly as her heart. "That position's been filled. It's been 6 months since it was posted." Her knees nearly buckled, but she forced herself to remain standing. Her chest tightened, and the world tilted. She didn't ask what she should do next, just turned away, the cold wind biting her cheeks like sharp knives. The town stretched out before her, muddy streets, false front buildings, a church spire rising against the endless expanse of prairie and the cold mountain shadows. She stepped off the platform, the mud sucking at her boots. Her legs felt heavy, the weight of a world that had already decided she didn't belong. Eliza walked without direction, not knowing where to go, but knowing she couldn't stay. The laughter of families echoing around her felt like a cruel reminder of what she had lost. Pride had no place here. It was a luxury she could no longer afford. She made it as far as the general store before the world went dark. Caleb Ward had been loading fence posts into his wagon when he heard the commotion. He'd seen the crowd gathered, but he wasn't one to concern himself with town gossip. What caught his attention was the woman crumpled on the boardwalk, the way the people turned their eyes away, unwilling to meet her gaze. Something about the way they avoided her, like she wasn't even there, stirred something deep within him. He dropped the post he was holding and walked over. The woman didn't see him approach. Her body was too tired, too worn from the weight of the world to notice. Caleb knelt beside her. She was fragile, her skin pale and bruised from the journey. Her hands, elegant, almost delicate, stopped him when he reached out. She looked up, her eyes distant, broken. She didn't speak, but the way she looked at him was enough. "I'll take her," Caleb said before he even knew what he was saying. The words left him, not out of pity, but because some part of him, buried deep beneath the years of hard work and grief, recognized something in her that needed protection. With one swift motion, he lifted her as if she weighed nothing. The town murmured. Whispers followed them, but Caleb didn't care. Some things mattered more than what others said. He didn't look back. Eliza awoke to the smell of wood smoke and strong coffee, the warm scent wrapping around her like a comforting embrace. She sat up slowly, the room spinning before her eyes. It wasn't the first time she'd woken in a strange place, but this felt different. The space around her was clean, almost too clean for someone who had arrived with nothing but rags. There was a quilt draped over her, smelling of cedar, and a window framed the wide, unbroken sky. For the first time in years, she felt safe. She swallowed hard, willing her body to remember that she was no longer in danger. She rose slowly from the bed, her legs shaky, and made her way to the window. The sight stole her breath. A ranch stretched before her, the barn a faded red against the sweeping prairie, cattle grazing like black specks against the gold and brown land. In the distance, mountains stood, silent sentinels watching over it all. A soft voice interrupted her thoughts. "You're awake!" She turned sharply. The man from before stood in the doorway, a quiet figure framed by the pale light. He was broader than she'd realized. His face was worn, hardened by years of wind and work, but his eyes were still kind. "Where am I?" Eliza asked, her voice barely more than a whisper. "My place." 10 miles outside of Red Creek. He hesitated. "You collapsed in town. Doc said you needed rest." She nodded slowly, still unsure of how to respond. "You don't know me," she said softly. "I might be trouble." He didn't react to her words, but there was something in his expression, something almost knowing. "Probably," he said, "but you were dying in the street, and nobody else moved." The blunt honesty hit harder than any pity could have. Eliza didn't know what to say, so she simply nodded. "I didn't ask for money," she said after a moment. "I just need work." "I'm offering both," he replied. "Room, board, and a small wage, everything legal." Eliza met his eyes. "I want it in writing." His lips twitched, the ghost of a smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. "Fair." She didn't know it then, but Eliza had already crossed a line she would never be able to uncross. That line led her into a future she hadn't dared to dream of. And though the road ahead was long, for the first time in years, it felt like the journey could be hers. Eliza awoke to the sound of soft footsteps echoing down the hall. Her body ached, but there was something familiar about the quiet rhythm of this new life. She had spent the last few days learning the house, walking its wooden floors, dusting shelves that had been neglected for too long. It felt like a lifetime since she had slept in a bed this warm, under a roof that didn't leak. She had been hired as Caleb's housekeeper, though neither of them spoke much about it. The days were filled with routine. Cleaning, cooking, tending to the garden Caleb had promised to bring back to life. There was no grandiose plan or bright future hanging over her head. It was simple work, just enough to fill the empty space where fear and uncertainty once lived. The ranch, with its weathered barns and sprawling pastures, became her world in a way she hadn't anticipated. There was peace here, peace she hadn't known in years. And every time she saw Caleb, when he worked, when he rested, when he stood at the window, his broad back against the light, her heart seemed to find a quiet place to settle. But Caleb was a man of few words, and the past that bound them both was never spoken. He never asked about her life before Red Creek, just as she never pressed him to share his. Instead, there was an unspoken understanding between them. This was a place to heal, a place to find something lost and buried. It wasn't long before Noah, Caleb's nephew, became a part of the house. He was a boy of few words, like his uncle. But there was something in his quiet demeanor that made Eliza feel protective. The boy was thin and quiet, with eyes that seemed too old for his small face. He moved through the house like a shadow, disappearing into rooms before Eliza even realized he had entered. One afternoon, as Eliza worked in the kitchen, Caleb came in, his boots heavy with the dust of the fields. He looked at her for a moment, nodding toward the stove. "Looks good," he said. The words were brief, but they settled around her like a soft weight. Eliza smiled despite herself. It was the first praise he had given her in days, maybe even weeks, and it meant more than she could say. Noah sat at the table, his eyes focused on something far away, his hands twisting around the silverware. He ate without tasting, his expression unreadable. There was something about the way he withdrew into himself that reminded Eliza of her own early years, when she had been a girl trying to disappear from the world. The silence stretched for a moment, and Eliza decided to break it. "I like Dickens," she said lightly, her voice almost too casual. "Great Expectations, especially." Noah paused, his fork midair, his eyes flicking toward her. It wasn't much, but it was enough to draw Caleb's attention. The older man's gaze shifted between Eliza and the boy, measuring, calculating something unspoken. "I always thought Pip chased the wrong thing," Eliza continued, her voice softer now, as if speaking to the stove. "We all do, sometimes." Noah's fork lowered slowly, and Caleb's eyes narrowed, his expression unreadable. But then, Noah did something Eliza hadn't expected. He nodded. It was a small movement, but in it she saw a crack, a brief opening in the armor he had built around himself. The next morning, when Eliza went to start the coffee, she found one of Noah's books on the kitchen table. It was marked, a page dog-eared. She picked it up carefully, running her fingers over the worn cover. It was a small thing, but it felt like progress, like Noah was beginning to trust her, just as she had started to trust this place and this family. Days passed, and Eliza found herself settling into the routine of life at the ranch. She woke early, made coffee, cleaned the house, and tended to the garden. In the evenings, she and Caleb would sit at the table together, the soft glow of oil lamps casting shadows on the walls. They didn't speak much, but it didn't matter. The silence between them felt more like a language than anything else. One Saturday, Caleb hitched the wagon. The supplies in town had to be restocked, and it was time to pick up new clothes for Eliza. She braced herself, knowing Red Creek would be a place of whispers. A woman like her, alone with a man like Caleb, would draw eyes, but it didn't matter anymore. Caleb's presence, quiet but steadfast, offered her a strength she hadn't known she could rely on. The town was bustling, more than usual. Wagons lined the streets, and women bustled in and out of shops, their voices rising in a chorus of mundane chatter. Caleb helped her down from the wagon, offering her his arm as they walked toward the store. Eliza looked up at him, unsure of herself. His grip on her arm was firm, steady, like it was a matter of course. She wasn't just a woman in rags anymore. She was standing beside a man who made her feel like she mattered, like she belonged. Inside the store, women watched them. Their gazes were sharp, their whispers quick. But Eliza didn't flinch, not this time. She was learning to stand tall, to face what came without running. One woman stepped forward, her smile sweet but her eyes hard. "Unconventional," she said, her voice sharp as glass. Eliza lifted her chin, meeting the woman's gaze. "Honest," she replied, her voice steady. Caleb's grip on her arm tightened, just enough to offer quiet support. The approval in his touch warmed her, settled her in a way she hadn't expected. They left the store soon after, their arms full of packages, the air outside crisp and cold. Eliza looked up at Caleb, something like hope blooming quietly in her chest. It was dangerous, this feeling. It was a risk she hadn't been ready to take, but now she couldn't help herself. She could feel it now, that fleeting, dangerous thing. Hope. That evening, after they returned to the ranch, Caleb set down his things and took a long breath. Eliza stood by the fire, watching the flames flicker in the hearth. "You know, you're not what I expected," he said, his voice low, almost a whisper. "Not what I thought I'd find." Eliza didn't speak at first. She didn't need to. She was learning the same thing. "I'm not what I expected either," she replied softly. It was simple, honest, and, for the first time in a long time, it was enough. The days that followed settled into a rhythm. Eliza worked in the mornings, always before the sun was fully up. She'd light the stove, get the coffee going, and start on the day's chores. By noon, the house was spotless, the kitchen warm, and the garden beginning to show signs of life, thanks to her persistent care. Caleb worked hard, coming in from the fields at dusk, his shoulders heavy with the weight of the land. But there was no bitterness in his movements, only a quiet determination that Eliza had begun to admire more than she had words for. She had learned his ways, how he liked the coffee strong, the wood stacked by the door, the barn swept clean before the night. In turn, Caleb had learned hers. The way she hummed quietly when she worked, the way she stopped and looked out the window as if searching for something she could never quite find. And Noah was beginning to change too. The boy still didn't speak much, but there were moments now when his eyes lingered on her, moments when he seemed to seek her out, his gaze softer than before. It was a small change, but it was enough. One morning, Caleb came in from the barn with his boots heavy with mud, his face drawn with the weight of the day. Eliza had already set the table for breakfast, But when he walked in, she could see it in his eyes, the same weariness she had seen in his face since she first arrived. It wasn't just the land that drained him. There was something else, something buried too deep to be spoken. "You're quieter than usual," Eliza said as she poured him a cup of coffee. He sat down at the table, rubbing his hand over his face before meeting her gaze. "There's always something to be done," he muttered, his voice low. "Something that needs fixing. Can't seem to get ahead of it." Quote. Eliza watched him for a moment, then placed a plate of pancakes in front of him. "Maybe you need to let someone else help." He looked at her, his brow furrowing. "I don't need help." "You've been doing it alone too long," Eliza said quietly, her voice steady. "You don't have to keep carrying it all on your own." Caleb studied her for a moment, his expression unreadable. Then, without another word, he picked up his fork and began to eat. Later that week, they received a letter from Red Creek's bank. Eliza had been putting off thinking about money, about the things that made her stomach churn with anxiety. But when Caleb handed her the letter, the weight of it was impossible to ignore. "It's about the loan," he said quietly. "The one for the ranch." Eliza felt her heart skip a beat. "What does it say?" Quote. Caleb's jaw tightened as he handed her the letter. It was thin, formal, a reminder of everything that could be lost. "The ranch is 3 months behind," Caleb murmured, his voice strained. "If we don't pay up by the end of January, they'll foreclose." The room went quiet as the words settled between them. The fear she had pushed away for so long came rushing back, pressing against her chest. "I'll get the money," she said, her voice steady, though her insides churned. "We'll find a way." Caleb didn't meet her gaze. His face was a mask of exhaustion and pride. "We've done what we can, Eliza, but it might not be enough." She looked at him, searching his face for something, anything, that might tell her he still had hope. But all she found was the same quiet determination that had drawn her to him in the first place. Caleb didn't ask for help, not from anyone, not even from the woman who had already done so much for him. "I won't let it slip away," Eliza said, more to herself than to him. "Not after everything we've built." The next morning, Eliza woke before the sun. The cold winter air bit at her cheeks as she made her way outside of the barn. The sight of the snow-covered fields stretched out before her, silent and still. The world felt heavy with the weight of what was coming. But in that moment, Eliza couldn't afford to think about the future. She had to focus on what she could do now. She spent the day working, the house now gleaming with the effort she poured into it. The kitchen smelled of fresh bread, and outside, the chickens were beginning to lay again. Noah helped with the barn, a quiet presence at her side as they worked. He had grown a little taller, a little older since she first arrived. His eyes were still distant at times, but there was less sadness in them now. Eliza glanced at him as she worked, noting how different he was from the boy who had arrived with Caleb. The change was subtle, but it was there. Just like the soft shift in the way Caleb held himself, a weight had lifted, if only just enough for them to see the light again. By the time they reached the town a week later, the cold had dug deeper into the land. The snow covered the streets, and the air was thick with whispers of things yet to come. The town square was busy with wagons and men carrying sacks of grain, women bundled in shawls and scarves hurrying past. Eliza clung to Caleb's side, the weight of the banker's letter still pressing against her chest like a stone. As they walked through the square, a sharp voice broke through the noise. "Well, look what we have here," a woman said, stepping out from behind a stack of cloth. Her smile was tight, her eyes glinting with something far from friendly. "Unconventional, don't you think?" Quote. Eliza straightened her back, meeting the woman's gaze with a steady look. "Honest," she replied, her voice firm. The woman's smile faltered, but only for a second. Caleb's grip on her arm tightened, just a little, a silent promise of protection. They didn't linger in the square. They moved quickly, through the crowd, and back to the wagon. But as they rode home, Eliza felt something shift inside her, something she hadn't allowed herself to feel before. Pride. For the first time in a long while, she didn't feel like an outsider. When they returned to the ranch, the sky was turning dark, and the cold had started to settle in. Caleb went to check the cattle, leaving Eliza alone with her thoughts. She stood by the window for a long time, watching the sky deepen into purple and then black, the wind whipping across the plains like a reminder that nothing ever stayed still for long. She thought about the future, about the ranch, and about the quiet, steady love that had begun to grow between her and Caleb. There were still obstacles ahead. There would always be obstacles, but Eliza knew now that she wasn't alone in facing them. They had a family now, a small but strong one, and together they could face anything. The sound of footsteps behind her broke her reverie. Caleb stood in the doorway, his face tired but resolute. "It'll be all right," he said softly, the weight of his words more comforting than any promise. Eliza smiled and turned to face him. "I know." They had a long road ahead, but for the first time Eliza wasn't afraid to walk it. The winter stretched on, longer than Eliza had expected. The nights were colder, the winds harsher, but inside the ranch, the warmth of the hearth was constant. She woke each morning to the smell of wood smoke and fresh coffee. Caleb's steady rhythm never changed. He worked the land and came home every night with his boots caked in mud, but there was something different in the way he held himself now. There was a quiet resolve about him, like he had accepted that things wouldn't always be easy, but they would always be his to fight for. Eliza had come to admire that about him. One cold morning, when the frost still clung to the ground, Caleb came into the house after a long morning of work. His shoulders were hunched, his face tight with something he hadn't yet shared. Eliza had been preparing breakfast, the smell of bacon and eggs filling the house, but when he walked in, she knew something was wrong. "Caleb," she asked, setting down the spatula and wiping her hands on her apron. He stood still for a moment, his eyes distant, before he met her gaze. "We've got company coming," he said quietly. His voice was low, tense, like he was bracing himself for something he couldn't control. Eliza felt a knot form in her stomach. "Company?" "Vernon Hale." Caleb's words were heavy with the weight of the name. "He's coming today to check on the ranch again." The words landed like a punch. Vernon Hale, the banker who had threatened to take everything, who had cast the shadow of foreclosure over them all. Eliza's heart sank, but she didn't let her fear show. She had learned that fear didn't solve anything. "I'll be ready," she said, her voice steady. Caleb didn't look convinced, but he didn't argue. He simply nodded and turned to leave. "We need to get the cattle moved. If Hale sees them out there, he'll know we're not keeping up." Eliza and Caleb worked together all morning, moving cattle to the far end of the ranch, trying to keep them out of sight from Hale's inevitable inspection. The wind bit at their faces, and the cold settled deep into their bones, but they pressed on. It was as if they were moving through a fog, each step heavy with the weight of the past months. By noon, they were back inside, the fire crackling in the hearth as Eliza prepared lunch. Noah was quieter than usual, sitting at the table with his eyes fixed on the window, watching for the approach of Hale's wagon. He hadn't said much since Caleb mentioned the banker, but Eliza knew the boy felt the same anxiety that hung thick in the air. The ranch had become a home to him too, and though his past was still a shadow over him, there was something different in the way he looked at this land now. He wasn't just Caleb's nephew anymore. He was family, and family fought for one another. The sound of wagon wheels creaked up the dirt road around mid-afternoon, and Eliza's heart beat a little faster. The man who stepped down from the wagon was tall, his suit crisp against the snow, his hat tipped back just enough to show the sharpness of his features. Vernon Hale had a smoothness to him, a confidence that came from having power over others. "Mr. Ward," Hale said, his smile cold and calculated as he extended his hand. "Still hanging on, I see." Quote. Caleb didn't return the handshake, his jaw set tight, but he gave a short nod. "Hale," he said simply. "What brings you out here today?" Hale's eyes flicked toward the house, the barn, the land stretching out in all directions. "Just making sure everything's still in order," he said, his tone casual, but there was something beneath it, something that didn't sit right. "It's been a few months since my last visit. Just wanted to check on your progress." Eliza stood in the doorway, her back straight, her chin lifted. The tension was so thick in the air she could almost taste it. She didn't move, didn't speak, just waited, knowing that whatever happened next, it wouldn't be easy. Hale's gaze shifted toward her, a brief flicker of recognition before he turned back to Caleb. "And this must be your housekeeper," he said, his smile widening. "Eliza, isn't it?" Quote. Eliza didn't answer immediately. Instead, she met his gaze, her eyes steady, her chin firm. "Yes," she said quietly. "I'm Eliza." Hale's eyes lingered on her for a moment, his smile never faltering. "A woman like you," he said, his voice smooth and almost too polite, "must feel quite out of place out here in the wilds of Wyoming." There it was, the subtle cruelty beneath his words, the way he looked at her, like she didn't belong, like she was an inconvenience, an obstacle. Eliza had known that look before, had felt the sting of being judged before anyone truly saw her. But she wasn't the same woman she had been when she stepped off that train. Not anymore. "I feel just fine, thank you," she said, her voice calm, her words clear. Hale chuckled softly, but there was no humor in it. "Well, I'm sure you're doing well enough, but I must say, I'm concerned about the ranch. Caleb, you've fallen behind again. This land—" He let out a slow, deliberate sigh. "It's a hard place to build anything." Eliza stood taller, her heart pounding in her chest. It was a game to him, this manipulation, this slow push toward despair, but she wouldn't let him win. Caleb's hand tightened on the railing by the door, his jaw working as he listened. He wasn't going to back down. Not now. Eliza knew it. She could see it in his eyes. "I'm not giving it up," Caleb said, his voice low but unwavering. "This ranch is mine, and I'll fight for it." Hale's eyes narrowed, the smile slipping away. "We'll see about that, won't we?" As the day wore on, Hale remained, his presence a constant reminder of the threat that hung over them. Caleb didn't leave him alone for long, but neither did Eliza. She stayed by the fire, her hands busy with work, but her mind focused on the conversation that was still hanging in the air. There was a storm coming, one they couldn't outrun, but it was a storm they would face together. The wind howled outside as the sky darkened, and just before dusk, Hale mounted his horse to leave. "I'll be in touch, Mr. Ward," he called over his shoulder, his tone flat, cold. "You have until the end of the month to settle your debts. After that, we'll take the property." Eliza's heart clenched at the finality of his words, but she didn't let it show. She knew, deep down, that they hadn't lost yet. Not as long as they were still standing together. Caleb turned to her after Hale had gone, his face lined with exhaustion. He didn't say anything right away, just stood there, staring out at the land, the ranch, their future. "We'll find a way," Eliza said quietly, stepping toward him. Caleb met her gaze, and for the first time in a long while there was something like hope in his eyes. "We will," he agreed softly. That night, as the wind howled outside, Caleb and Eliza sat by the fire, Noww at their side. There was no more talk of the bank, no more mention of the letter. Only the quiet, steady pulse of life continuing in its small, unspoken way. The ranch was theirs, and together they would make sure it stayed that way. The snow was heavy, falling in thick layers that made the world outside look like a dream, the landscape smoothed over by the weight of winter. Inside the house, the fire crackled as Eliza sat with a cup of coffee in her hands, her thoughts quiet for the first time in weeks. She had spent the morning scrubbing the kitchen, washing the last of the laundry that had arrived. But now, in the stillness of the afternoon, the weight of everything, of the ranch, of the loan, of Hale's threat, settled into her bones like a chill she couldn't shake. Noww was upstairs, reading, though he had done little more than look at the pages since morning. His silence had become more pronounced in recent days, as if he, too, felt the heavy weight of what was coming. She hadn't asked him about it. He was a boy who carried burdens silently, a trait he had learned far too early. But Eliza saw it in his eyes. She saw it in the way he hesitated before speaking, as if the words were too much to hold at once. Caleb had gone out early that morning to repair the fence lines, his body moving with a precision Eliza had come to recognize over the past weeks. He was steady, reliable, a man made of the same grit and determination that the land had carved into him over the years. But Eliza saw the toll it took on him, on all of them. Every day was a fight, every decision a risk, but still, they fought. She wasn't sure how long they could keep doing it. That afternoon, as the wind whistled through the cracks in the walls, a knock echoed through the house. It was sharp, urgent, and Eliza's heart leapt into her throat as she hurried to answer it. She expected hail, expected more bad news, but instead, standing on the doorstep was Maggie Crowder, her hands wrapped tightly around a bundle of blankets. "Maggie?" Eliza blinked, surprised by the unexpected visit. Maggie rarely came by without a reason, and today, her face was set with something that looked too much like worry. "Eliza," Maggie said, her voice tight. "I need to talk to Caleb. It's important." Eliza stepped aside, letting Maggie into the warm house, her eyes searching the woman's face for an explanation. Maggie didn't speak right away, her eyes scanning the room before she set the blankets down on the table. "What's going on?" Eliza asked, her voice low, knowing something was coming. She could feel it in the air, like a storm rolling in from far away. Maggie sighed, pulling at the hem of her shawl as if the weight of her words was too much to carry. "It's Vernon Hale," she said quietly. "He's not going to wait until the end of the month. He's already started making moves." Eliza felt the blood drain from her face. "What do you mean?" Maggie's hand shook as she picked up one of the blankets, smoothing it over her lap. "I don't know all the details yet, but word's getting around. Hale's been talking to people in town, and I overheard him saying he's going to sell the ranch to someone else if Caleb doesn't come up with the money sooner." Eliza's heart beat faster. Who's going to buy it? Quote. Maggie shook her head, her eyes filled with something close to fear. "I don't know, but whoever it is, they're willing to pay. Hale's always had buyers waiting." Eliza didn't know what to say. She felt her hands tremble, but she steadied herself. "We need to tell Caleb." Maggie nodded, standing slowly. "I'll leave you to it," she said quietly. "I just thought you should know. He's running out of time, Eliza." Quote. When Caleb returned to the house, the look on his face said it all. He had known, or at least suspected, that something was coming. The ranch hadn't been the only thing he'd been fighting for these past few months. It was his pride, his family, the land that had always been there for him. He didn't speak at first, just set his tools down by the door and met Eliza's gaze. She could see the exhaustion in his eyes, the weight of the world he was carrying all on his own. "We don't have much time," she said softly. "Maggie came by. Hale's already talking about selling the ranch to someone else. He won't wait until the end of the month." Caleb's jaw tightened, his expression hardening as he took a step forward. "I figured as much," he muttered. "Hale's always got an angle." Eliza's heart ached for him, for the man who had done so much to keep this place together, only to be undone by forces outside his control. But she wouldn't let him give up. Not now. "We'll figure something out," she said, her voice firm. "We can still fight." Quote. Caleb's eyes softened as he looked at her, a flicker of something deep in his gaze. "You don't have to keep fighting for me, Eliza," he said quietly. "This land, this ranch, it's my burden, not yours." But Eliza shook her head, stepping closer to him. "It's not just your burden, it's ours. All of ours." He stared at her for a long moment, as if trying to read the truth in her words. Then, without a word, he reached out and pulled her into an embrace, his arms strong and warm around her. Eliza closed her eyes, resting her head against his chest, feeling the steady beat of his heart. The days passed in a blur. The work didn't stop. The snow kept falling, and every moment felt like a countdown. Caleb and Eliza spent their days working together, side by side, the threat of losing everything hanging over them like a dark cloud. One evening, as the sun dipped low behind the mountains, Caleb came inside, his face grim. He set down a letter, sealed with the Red Creek Bank's official stamp. "Another one," he said, his voice tight. Eliza opened it slowly, her heart pounding. The letter was from Vernon Hale, giving them one last warning. Pay up by the end of the month, or the ranch would be sold. The words blurred before her eyes. She had known it was coming, but seeing it in writing, seeing how real it was, made her feel sick to her stomach. "I'll make a deal with Hale," Caleb said, his voice low but steady. "I'll give him whatever I can." Maybe he'll listen. Eliza shook her head, her throat tight with emotion. No, you can't keep doing this alone. We don't have any other choice, Caleb said, his voice soft but resolute. We'll get through this. We have to. Eliza didn't know if they could, but what she did know was this: they wouldn't give up without a fight. As the wind howled outside, rattling the windows of the house, she realized that the fight wasn't just about the ranch anymore. It was about them, about the family they were building, about the love they had found in the most unlikely of places. They had come too far to let it all slip away now. The night before the deadline, the wind howled like a restless spirit, whipping around the house, its voice muffled by the walls but still carrying the weight of the world. Eliza lay awake in her bed, her mind spinning with thoughts of what could happen the next day. The ranch had never felt so fragile, so close to being lost forever. And yet, amidst the uncertainty, there was a sense of quiet resolve in her heart. She had come to this place with nothing but fear, and now she had everything to fight for. Caleb, too, lay awake in his room, his thoughts as restless as the wind outside. He could hear the soft murmur of Eliza's breathing through the walls, and though he had spent the last few months trying to carry the weight of this land alone, he knew, deep down, that he couldn't do it without her. Her strength had become his anchor, her belief in their future, something he hadn't realized he needed until now. The morning broke clear and cold, the sun barely breaking through the gray clouds. Caleb and Eliza rose early, the silence of the house thick with unspoken words. They had spent the past few weeks working tirelessly to make the ranch as presentable as possible, but they both knew it wouldn't be enough. Vernon Hale's arrival would mark the end of their fight. And yet, in that quiet, unspoken place between them, there was still a glimmer of hope, however small. They worked side by side throughout the morning, Eliza tending to the house while Caleb moved toward the barn, making sure the cattle were fed and the fences were secure. Noah helped when he could, though his hands were still small for the work he'd taken on. But there was something different about him now. He wasn't the boy who had arrived at the ranch, silent and withdrawn. He had grown into someone who could see the weight of the world and still choose to stand beside them. Noon came, and with it, the sound of a wagon approaching. Eliza's heart skipped a beat. She didn't need to look outside to know who it was. She could hear the creak of the wagon wheels, the soft shuffle of boots in the snow. Caleb's eyes met hers, and for a moment, neither of them moved. It was time. Vernon Hale dismounted from his horse with practiced ease, his cold eyes scanning the ranch as he approached. His smile was thin, his features sharp and calculating. He walked toward Caleb, his boots crunching in the snow as he extended his hand. "Mr. Ward," Hale said, his voice smooth, but there was a hardness beneath it. "It's good to see you again." Caleb didn't return the handshake. His gaze remained steady, a quiet challenge in his eyes. "I'll cut to the chase, Hale. I'm not giving this land up." Hale chuckled, though there was no humor in it. "You're a stubborn man, Mr. Ward, but I'm afraid you're running out of time." Eliza stepped forward, her voice calm but firm. "We're not running out of time. You are," she said, meeting Hale's gaze. Hale's eyes flicked to her, surprised by the challenge in her voice. "And you are?" "I'm Caleb's wife," Eliza said, her voice carrying through the cold air. "And we're not backing down." For a long moment, Hale said nothing, his smile faltering just enough for Eliza to see the doubt in his eyes. He had expected weakness, perhaps fear, but instead he saw resolve. A family, standing together, ready to fight. "We have money to pay you," Caleb said, breaking the silence. "And we'll settle the debt, but you have no right to take this land, not when we've worked for it." Hale's eyes narrowed. "You don't have enough money," he said. "And without the money, this ranch is mine." Eliza stepped forward, standing beside Caleb. "Then you'll have to take it from us." "We'll fight for it, for as long as it takes. We won't just hand it over." Hale's lips curled into a thin smile, his gaze flicking between the two of them. "You're wasting your time," he said softly, almost pitying. "But I'll give you one last chance. I'll take what's mine, and you'll walk away with nothing." "Not happening," Caleb said, his voice low but resolute. There was a long silence, the wind howling in the distance, before Hale finally turned on his heel, his face darkening. "Very well," he said, his voice cold. "We'll see how long that resolve lasts." Quote, he climbed into his wagon without another word, leaving Caleb and Eliza standing together in the snow, the weight of his threats hanging between them. As the wagon rumbled away, Eliza felt a quiet relief settle in her chest. They hadn't lost. Not yet. And with Caleb beside her, she didn't think they would. The days that followed were filled with tension, but there was a sense of determination in the air that hadn't been there before. Caleb worked even harder, taking on extra tasks, fixing the fences and the barn, keeping the cattle fed. Eliza worked beside him, finding small ways to ease the strain, taking care of the house, and making sure the food was ready when he came in for a break. Noah helped too, his silence more a presence than anything else. He had found his place here, in the quiet rhythm of their work, in the steady pace of life on the ranch. And slowly, Eliza could see him changing, his posture straighter, his steps more confident. The boy who had arrived so broken had found something to believe in. And then, one day, the letter came. It was brief, but its words made Eliza's heart race. Vernon Hale had agreed to their payment plan. The ranch was saved. They had won. Eliza stood on the porch, Caleb beside her, watching as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the sky in hues of pink and gold. The land stretched before them, vast and wide, the ranch standing proud against the encroaching night. They had fought for it, fought for each other, for the family they had built from the rubble of their pasts, and now they had their future. "Look at it," Caleb said quietly, his hand resting on the porch railing. "All of it." Eliza looked out across the land, at the barn, the corral, the fields. She saw more than just the land. She saw the life they had built. She saw the love they had fought for, the family they had fought to protect. "We built this," she said softly. "Together," Caleb answered, his voice low with a quiet pride. And as the night settled around them, with the land stretched wide and endless, Eliza knew one thing for certain. This was home. This was where she belonged. And it was a place she would never leave. If this tale stirred your heart, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Tales from the Frontier, where history rides the frontier. Courage is tested, and love refuses to die. See you in the next tale, partner.